Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Karen Weaver. I've been asking myself, and perhaps you have been too, now what? How do athletic departments pay their athletes? How do they decide who gets what? There are now some systems in place that weren't before. My guest today has written extensively about the emerging challenges in this new era. Ross Dellinger is one of the preeminent college football reporters today. He breaks stories weekly, sometimes daily, on what college athletic directors and coaches and presidents are navigating, partnering with, and worried about as the new world begins. We also have some breaking news to cover. So, Ross, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, good to be gone, Karen. How are you?
Good. I'm really good. Thank you for squeezing us in. I know this is hectic with Big 12 media days, Big 10 media days. This time of year is full bore, so I appreciate this. I want to talk a little bit about this concept of collective bargaining. And this hasn't risen to the top in recent days, but you broke the news a couple of weeks ago that both the Tennessee president and their athletics director came out in support of the idea of collective bargaining. And this strikes me as news. Can you walk us through the story and how it never really reverberated with the other programs before like this?
Yeah, sure. I think as as college athletics continues to sort of evolve from an amateur entity to more of a professional type of organization, which is what we're seeing since schools are able to directly compensate athletes. You're seeing more and more coaches, athletic directors want stability, rules, regulations, especially since they are now directly compensating athletes. And there's really only two ways to do that. If you talk to labor lawyers and attorneys, one is federal intervention with a congressional bill or an order from the president of some sort. And the other way uh, is collective bargaining. To basically make athletes employees and collectively bargain with them. Those are sort of the two ways that, two routes of where you can actually have some, protection against antitrust lawsuits, which we see the NCAA subject of that and the conference is subject of that so much. I think many people maybe thought that the House settlement would have provided some of that or would provide some of that. Um, that really wasn't never the case. Actually, in the first memo that was distributed to presidents and athletic directors about the House case, this was back last May. It specifically said in there one of the negatives of it was it does not protect college athletics against antitrust lawsuits.
Right.
So the only way to do it are those two routes: Congress, in the federal government, or collectively bargain. And I think more and more ADs and coaches are starting to come around to the idea that collectively bargaining with athletes is the route because of the issues and the divisiveness and sort of the dividing Congress. Seems like a long shot for any legislation. So Danny White, the athletic director at Tennessee, as you mentioned, the chancellor at Tennessee, Donde Plowman. I think they have for really months, if not really years, for Danny White, they have started to think deeply about what a collective bargaining sort of model might look like. The problem is there are just so many issues and complications in doing that. And I kind of dove into them in that story, how complex and complicated it could get. And there are just so many hurdles. And I think that the first hurdle is something that many college leaders are fighting against, and that is athletes need to be deemed employees in order to collectively bargain, unionize, and then protect it, and then to gain the protection that the NCAA wants, antitrust protection, athletes would have to be deemed employees and unionize, and then they'd have to strike the two sides a collectively bargain agreement. And what's kind of ironic is a lot of college leaders are encouraging Congress to put into legislation anti-employment clauses, so they don't want athletes to be employees. So there's a lot of disagreement right now on this collective bargaining and employment issue among college leaders. But more and more, as that story kind of laid out, they're starting to realize that in order to get rules and regulations, we sort of have to do this, as they might say. And there were certainly plenty more than just the Tennessee administrators in that story. I think Oklahoma's athletic director, North Carolina's athletic director, Baylor's athletic director, and many coaches, Nick Saban, Lane Kiffin, all speaking publicly in favor of a collective bargaining model. And many of them don't want an employment collective bargaining model. They want a non-employment model, which doesn't exist. So again, would take a congressional sort of action to create a special class of that. So, but it's been interesting to follow.
I was really surprised to hear first that the president and the AD were in public alignment about this. And then it feels like it's been 6 years, 7 years since we had back in 2019, where when Michael Drake was the president at Ohio State, Gene Smith was the AD, other presidents got together and said, this is our hard no. We will not have athletes as employees, and collective bargaining is off the table. In your studying it, where has the shift come? Just because of all the chaos? Is that really where it resonates?
I think so. Yeah. When you look at the lack of regulation right now, and when you factor in that now schools can directly pay athletes, there's even more of a motivation to have rules around those payments and athlete movement. I think there are probably a couple of main points. One, it is the movement of players and the fact that these revenue share sort of contracts that schools are striking with athletes may not be binding enough, may not limit the movement like so many want. So I think that's the first frustration point. I think the second is the recruiting sort of inducements from other schools to poaching athletes. One school offering more money to an athlete that's under contract at another school, because you don't have a collective bargaining sort of agreement, and because you're not protected by antitrust. There's just not as many rules and regulations around all this stuff. And so
Yeah.
those are the two probably kind of leading things that, I think presidents, ADs, coaches want to see sort of limited and want to see rules around.
Yeah. Okay. So we had two major things that happened after the House settlement began on July 1st. We had the College Sports Commission formed. So if you could tell us what that is. And also we had have NIL go. So if you could tell us what that is.
Yeah. The College Sports Commission is sort of the new enforcement arm that will enforce all of this sort of revenue share concept that we're entering, that college athletics is entering. I like to think of it as the College Sports Commission is sort of at the top, and then it has sort of three branches off of it that it manages and oversees. One of the branches is the cap management system, where schools input their cap numbers and their rev share numbers and their contracts, what
That's
they're
their
paying.
just to be sure, that's their roster cap.
That's
If
right.
they opted into the agreement, they agreed to
Mhm.
have a maximum number of athletes on the roster.
Well, maximum number of athletes, and it's as well the revenue share cap too. So it
Okay.
monitors how
Right.
many how many players you have and who the players are on the roster, and then how much that you pay them in rev share so that you're under the cap. And it's kind of it's a digital platform sort of system, almost like a big spreadsheet, and it's run by LBI, which is that's the platform, and NBA uses it, other pro leagues use it. So that's one branch of like the College Sports Commission. They sort of manage that, and schools input all their information and all that. The second branch is the enforcement in sort of infractions team or staff that hasn't been hired yet, is in the process of being hired. And that sort of enforcement investigative team, goes and investigates, schools that maybe have gone over the cap, maybe are, uh, circumventing the cap in different ways. Maybe they're tampering, breaking other, long time sort of rules. I think there's an investigative team for that. So that's the second branch. And then the third branch is NIL Go, as you mentioned. It's the NIL clearinghouse, which is probably obviously more attention certainly on that than anything these days. And NIL Go is a clearinghouse. Each athlete must submit their well, let me back up, because I'll say that a lot of people don't understand kind of the compensation packages that athletes are getting now. So, in as part of a rev share agreement with the school. So one bucket of compensation is the scholarship and benefits. It's the old bucket. And then the second is the rev share, the direct compensation from schools to athletes. And then there's a third bucket, which is NIL, third party NIL endorsement commercial opportunities that athletes may have. And the NIL doesn't count against the revenue share cap. So each year, schools have the ability to pay athletes up to $20.5 million in year one. That cap will go up. And it's really just like a salary cap in the NFL, and you got to stay below that 20.5. But NIL, the third bucket that I mentioned, doesn't count against that cap if it passes the clearinghouse. And the clearinghouse is there to make sure that the third party NIL that athletes strike are, quote, real and authentic, and are not a lot of the sort of phony, you might say, salaries from boosters and booster collectives that athletes have been getting now for years. So that's what the clearinghouse is there for. So any third party NIL deal of $600 or more has to be submitted by the athlete to the clearinghouse, and it goes through steps in a process, and the clearinghouse decides if it is real or not. If it decides that it's not real and it doesn't meet its two main sort of requirements, it must be deemed as for a real like business purpose. So there has to be some kind of business purpose behind the deal. You have to prove that. And then the other one is the fair market value sort of compensation range. The deal has to be in a compensation range that Deloitte has been hired to create, and has created this fair market value sort of a logarithm. And if it doesn't meet those things, the clearinghouse does not clear it, and an athlete has the ability to resubmit it once. You have the ability to resubmit it. And on resubmission, if it is not clear again, then the athlete has the ability to go to kind of a court overseen arbitration. And there'll be 8 arbitrators that will sort of take each case, kind of like a court case, and argue back and forth. You have one side arguing against the other. And then the arbitrator is supposed to rule within 45 days. And they'll either rule that in favor of the clearinghouse, or in favor of the athlete. And so that's kind of how it works. And if the athlete decides to take the deal, even if it's not cleared by the clearinghouse, or even if an arbitrator rules against it, then that athlete can take the deal still, He can earn the compensation and take the deal, but he'll be ruled ineligible, or she will be ruled ineligible.
So you mentioned two further outside groups that I just like a little more clarity. One you mentioned in the CSC, the College Sports Commission, there's a group that'll be investigating, right, who will be checking out whether schools are in violation. And then you mentioned this arbitration panel. Who will comprise those two groups?
Yeah, with the arbitration is, it will be 8 arbitrators that are supposed to be like neutral arbitrators that each House plaintiff attorneys and the NCAA and conferences uh, decide on. They actually have already decided on them. I believe they're in the final steps of agreeing to the 8 arbitrators. They're neutral arbitrators. Most of them are like former judges, and stuff like that. So, what was your first
Just
question?
about the people who are looking at the NIL deals. Who's that? Oh, sorry, the group that is the College Sports Commission. You mentioned that those folks will adhere and enforce the rules. I assume they're different than the arbitrators.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, the arbitration is actually not, though it is sort of comes after the NIL clearinghouse, and the NIL clearinghouse is kind of or is under the College Sports Commission umbrella. The arbitration system is sort of like a neutral court overseen system, and so
Okay.
that's really not under the umbrella of the College Sports Commission. It's all like outside. So the College Sports Commission enforcement and sort of investigative staff is in the process of being hired. I think Brian Seeley, former Major League Baseball general counsel and an executive. He's been hired to be the CEO, basically running the director of the College Sports Commission. And he's made 2 hires already to like his sort of executive team, but they're in the process of hiring the investigative and enforcement team.
Do you know if they have any official reporting structure to the NCAA, or are they independent in making their decisions?
Yeah, they're pretty independent. In fact, the NCAA has little to no role in the College Sports Commission. It has been really administered and created by the Power Four conferences, but because the Pac-12 is a named defendant, they're involved as well.
Right.
Washington State and Oregon State specifically, and so I think that the NCAA is sort of ceded the enforcement of all this to the College Sports Commission.
That's a really major shift that I think a lot of people are missing in all of this. Because for years you could just blame the NCAA and said, well, they don't know what they're doing, or they care more about this school than that school. So I think that's kind of interesting. Um, let's talk a little bit about the draft order that may come out of the office of the president here of the United States, the Save College Sports. What is that? What are the framings that we know of at this point?
Yeah. Well, we don't know if it'll ever happen. First
Right.
off, it was supposed to happen in late May. I actually got a copy of it then, and I actually did not report about it because I was afraid that it wouldn't happen. And it was supposed to happen May 27th. It was supposed to be announced, and then they decided to pause it, mostly because they wanted to give Congress time to work on legislation, which is a more permanent solution than sort of a temporary solve that an executive order might offer. But this time, I got the fuller draft, and it was circulating enough that if I didn't report it, others would have or were going to. So um, kind of laid it out there a little bit. Nothing real like jarring or surprising in it. I think it's 7 pages. Its first 2 pages are like a preamble um, to a list of directives that Donald Trump would make to his cabinet members. And basically, it directs certain cabinet members, the Secretary of Labor, the Secretary of Education, the Attorney General, to create policy around aspects of college athletics to govern college athletics. And I think there are probably five main sort of aspects that it asks its cabinet members to create policy on. One of them is sort of a like limited liability protection against antitrust. Um, Specifically, the order says when involving scholarships and opportunities for athletes, you can kind of interpret that in different ways. The second thing is prevent what it calls unqualified and unscrupulous agents from representing athletes. So probably some kind of agent registry certification system in college. The third one would be to support what it calls uniformity um, in rules, which really probably just means preempting NIL state laws.
Mm.
The fourth one is working with the NCAA Olympic team to sort of preserve in some way Olympic sports, which again it depends on what the policies that the cabinet member would create. This specific directive is to the assistant to the president for domestic policy. I'm going to presume that there would be some kind of policy created in this case to protect Olympic sports, such as requiring schools to uh, not cut sports or have or codify the NCAA's minimum of sports, something like that. And then the fifth one is probably the biggest one, which it directs the Secretary of Education and the National Labor Relations Board to implement policy clarifying the status of athletes. And it's if you read the preamble, um, the president believes that college athletes, should not be employees. So you could read into that certainly the directive would be to deem them students and not employees. So that's kind of what it lays out, and it's a series of directives and followed after that preamble, and we're just not sure exactly when this is going to be announced or if it will be announced at all.
Yeah. And it doesn't lay any deadlines or timelines as to what each of these agencies, departments, when they would need to produce a result, right?
It actually does.
Oh, it does. Okay.
Yeah, it I think it gives trying to sift through it here. I think it gives 60 days to the Attorney General and the Federal Trade Commission to make revisions and have the new policy ready. So it gives 60 days from the time of the executive order for that to happen.
Okay.
It gives 120 days to the Secretary of Education and the Treasury to develop what it calls financial education for athletes. So the main one is the 60-day one, which is pretty quick by the way
Yes.
that the government runs. So part of the reason for delaying the EO, which as I mentioned was supposed to drop in May, part of also the reason to delaying it may be to give those entities time.
Gotcha. Gotcha. But at the same time, that's the administrative side of the house. Now we have the legislative, yet another bill that comes up in the House or the Senate called the SCORE Act. And that has already been moved out of one committee to another. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, the SCORE Act sort of honestly sort of lays out a lot of the same aspects that are in the executive order draft. It preempts NIL state law. It deems athletes as students and not employees. It grants the NCAA and the College Sports Commission uh, a limited liability protection. Um, it creates agent registry type stuff. It's a lot of the same stuff. So it's just in legislation, which is probably more permanent than an executive order, because a lot of the executive orders have been challenged in court and have lost. A lot of Donald Trump's executive orders. So legislation would certainly be more permanent. And so, I said the other day, if there, 20 steps in getting legislation approved and passed and making a bill a law, it's on like step 3 or 4, you might say. So it's still very early in the process, but very few all-encompassing college athletic bills in the last 5 years since the NCAA started lobbying for a bill have made it this far.
Okay.
In fact, really, none of them have. No all-encompassing bill has gone to a full committee markup, which is expected next week.
Okay.
On this, it's expected. It could be delayed. It could be pushed back. But so it's advancing fairly quickly. It is bipartisan, but certainly plenty of Democrats disagree with it, including many in the U.S. Senate, where really, if it does pass the House, it faces its stiffest test in the Senate. And I think most would say that it has, as it's written now, has a very, very low probability of passing the Senate because of filibuster rules that require 60 votes. And that means 7 Democrats signing on to a bill that has anti-employment and has protection for the NCAA, which Democrats for a while have been pretty vocally against.
So, Ross, I know you've got to head out shortly, but if you were giving presidents one prediction for the next year, 18 months about the state of college athletics, what would you tell them to expect?
I often am asked, when is everything going to stabilize? And usually my answer is perhaps never. Um, and if not never, then at least another 5-7 years. We're in a time of change that, without federal intervention, like a congressional legislation of some kind, or employment and collective bargaining, there will continue to be lawsuits against the rules and regulations, despite the settlement. There will continue to be just in general instability in college athletics. And there's probably no doubt, and you talk to the people who are even against employment and collective bargaining, the most passionately against it, and they will even acknowledge that the end of the road is collective bargaining.
Right.
It's going to happen, whether it happens next year or 5 years or 15 years. So that's kind of where it is. And many people, like Danny White of Tennessee, want to get there now, immediately. And
Yes.
others are certainly trying to do what they can to avoid that. But I think down the road, you mentioned like 18 months. This probably won't happen in 18 months, but I think it's pretty obvious that, football and men's basketball, the two revenue generating sort of sports, are going to have to separate themselves, at least at the highest level, at the power conference level, in collectively bargain.
Ross, you are a tremendous resource. I will link your articles in my show notes for everybody who wants to do it. Thank you so much for taking time with me today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was great to be on.
Thank you.